So thank you for joining us here, or myself here this morning or this afternoon, early afternoon. Today's topic, what we're going to be talking about is popular electronic devices. I didn't say it here, but it's pretty obvious with everything else, marine electronic devices. And it's, in particular, we're going to be talking about products that are really popular in 2017. Unlike my electrical presentations, electronics are a field that are continuously changing and evolving every year. Today we're in January. There's going to be a whole batch of new products. Over the last 5 years now, a lot of new products are also coming out in Miami. Not all of them, some of them, but we've got about 11 products here that came out in the fall. And so they're staggered a little bit, and that's what we're going to be talking about is latest, greatest marine electronic products for boating. So here's sort of the agenda that we're going to try to accomplish today. We're going to be talking a little bit about making sense of all your options, because it's certainly overwhelming when we help boaters figure out what sort of navigation system or electronics they need for their boats. There's a lot of choice out there, and there's maybe too much choice. So we always help try to narrow down all the selections. And we're going to be looking at that, what's important to you. Because there's no such thing as a perfect electronic system. It's really tailored to you. There's so much choice. It's like there's no perfect house. There's no perfect boat. It's a boat for you, and it's a compromise of what you're going to choose on so many different variables. We're going to be looking at Chartplotters, which are today called MFDs, which stand for multifunctional displays, sounders, radars. AIS stands for automatic identification systems. We'll talk about a little bit about autopilots, cameras, and then lastly, sound systems. So we're going to go through all of those, and I want to emphasize that it's not that number one is better than number two, it's just a list. We're going to go through a total of 12 products. And at the end, feel free to ask questions during the presentation, but also at the end, I'll open the floor for some questions as well. So first thing you've got to ask yourself when you're looking for an electronic package is not to be tempted to look at your neighbors and to see what your neighbor in the mooring slip beside you is doing with his navigation system. And that's what I was trying to emphasize at the beginning of this presentation is, remember, there is no such thing as the perfect navigation system. You have to have a navigation for what you do for your boat. So one of the things you got to ask yourself is, what sort of boat am I going to do, right? So we have owners that just go to Gambier to an outstation. Some other boat owners are going to go Gulf Islands. Some other ones go Desolation, Broughton's, Central Coast, outside Vancouver Island, or they're going to take off offshore. All those are different sort of boating habits. And so as a boat owner, you want to limit a little bit your scope by trying to figure out what am I doing with my boat regularly in the near term and the far term, right? Like long term, what am I going to be doing with my boat? And that's going to be a really good way for you to gauge what sort of navigation system and reliability and redundancy you want to have on your boat. The other thing is, electronics, as much as there's new products coming out every year, it's not something that people are changing every year. An average navigation system is around probably 15 years. 10 years is someone who's changing it rather quickly. Someone who's changing their navigation system every 5 years is extremely rare. I mean, we last year worked on 600 boats, and in a given year, I'm going to see someone changing their electronics after 5-year refresh, maybe once or twice. Everyone else is changing them when there's multiple generations. They still have a flip phone, and they're thinking, oh, maybe I should get a smartphone. That's kind of the gap that people are waiting, because it's a big expense, right? It adds up. So boat owners are waiting about anywhere between 10 and 20 years to change their navigation system. And what I try to emphasize with this point is there are some electronics on your boat that you can't keep. Some things that are 10 years old that are still good. And so you might keep one thing, like we did a boat where they had an old Furuno GPS Map 32 or GPS 32, and they kept it on board as a redundant device. It does the job, it's great. It's a trawler, they're going to go up north. There's no need to get another one, and if they replaced it, they'd be replacing with the same thing. So there's things you can spare on your boat, and it's not like getting new electronics, I got to get rid of everything. you can pick and choose what are things that are still good on your boat and get maybe other things that are going to be much better or better. The other choice that you have, although that is dwindling over time, is this choice between an all-in-one and a single device. Meaning, in the past, boat owners would have a radar screen. They'd have a Chartplotter screen. They'd have a sounder screen. And that's traditionally how things were, because when you bought a radar, it came with a screen. You bought a sounder, it came with a display. I still have boat owners that tell me, and it's not uncommon, they say, Jeff, that's how I've boated all my life. I don't want to change. And I'm like, that's fine. I can give you a TV and put it on CNN and leave it there. And then when you want to watch Fox, we'll have another TV that has Fox News. But know that both of those TV could change the channel. You just choose not to want to change the channel. Meaning today, there's no such thing, or it's very rare to have a radar-only display, a Chartplotter-only display, or a sounder-only display. The display, like a TV or a computer, can do multiple things. If you choose to only watch or see radar on your display, that's your choice, and we do that on big boats, 80, 90, 100. They'll have 3 screens, 5 screens, radar, sounder, Chartplotter, cameras. And they just want it always to be set one way. But if they felt like it, they could change and have the radar screen suddenly be a sounder screen. And there's really rare, and it's becoming harder to find a display that is dedicated for a single purpose. So, and that's those displays that are multifunction are called MFDs. The other thing too, not all devices can be networked. And so displays, you might, if you're a boat owner that has dual helms, that's a consideration where you're going to be looking at your electronics. Some people forget that. They just buy a screen for the lower helm, and they're like, oh, later on I'm going to buy a screen for the upper helm. But you want to make sure that the screen you bought for the lower helm can be networked to an upper screen. Because then the problem is, if you have radar at the lower screen, how are you going to distribute it to the top screen? And that's why on older boats, you'd have 2 radars. Not just for redundancies, because they wanted a radar at the flybridge and they wanted a radar at the pilot house, right? And so there was no way of distributing a radar signal to 2 places. So boats would have 2 radars. So they wanted to have. Nowadays, you only need to have 1 radar, and you can have radar in 2 places, 3 places, 4 places. That signal is just distributed to wherever you want it to be. So it's important to think about what you want to do today and what you want to do tomorrow. And the other big choice is, do you like the familiarity of buttons, or nowadays, the familiarity of touchscreens, right? Because as a boat owner, touchscreens are becoming more and more intuitive because we have them on our smartphones. Laptops have them now. That being said, I always imagine the worst case scenario, and you're out in Johnstone Strait or Strait of Georgia, and you've got a side swell 6 to 8 foot, and everything in your boat is flying around. And you're trying to change or do a course selection. You try to do that on a screen, and your ship probably doesn't have handles on it because they never imagined that you'd be in such a sea state. Like on the big boats, they'll actually have handles on the side of the screens. But most boats don't. And so now you've got to hit a perfect point on the screen as you're flying around. So if you're going to be in those sort of situations, you might want to look at hybrid or having a tactile screen, touchscreen, but also buttons on the side and a little keypad so that when things are not going well, you have a D-pad, a directional D-pad to choose what you want, and at least the D-pad's not moving and you can easily get what you need. So those are some choices. But some people just boat when it's nice weather and they boat very little. And for them, touchscreen works. But I always try to emphasize to people, imagine the worst case scenario. When you're really going to need the device, things are horrible. Do you want to not be able to use your equipment? Right? Because touchscreen is not always useful in all conditions. When you're going to be choosing the type of device that you have, it's almost the war between Apple and Microsoft. Are you going to go for something that is feature rich like Microsoft, Android would be a good example. It can do everything under the sun. Or are you going to choose something like an iPhone, which has less features? An iPhone's not better than an Android, clearly not, but why people like them is they can't screw it. They can't make a lot of wrong choices, right? It's very simple, the camera's simple, everything's simple about an iPhone. And so when you choose electronics, you're going to be faced with that decision as well. Do you want something that can do everything and the manual's an inch thick? Or do you want something that you never really need to look at the manual and it simply does what you want it to do 99% of the time and you're really not going to do anything else because you can't be bothered? So choosing between feature-rich and simplicity is another choice that you've got to think about when you choose your electronics. iPad smartphone integration is really popular as a way to repeating a helm. In the past, sailboaters would have, a Chartplotter in the main helm, and they'd have one maybe down below at the pilot station, the chart table. Nowadays, what they're doing is they're simply repeating what's at the nav pod at the helm onto an iPad or a smartphone. Also make sure that as you add more and more gizmos on our boats, the electrical systems on a boat that was built from the 1980s or the 1990s or 2000 never anticipated what we would put on our bridge. Okay, so no engineer was thinking in 1984, yeah, I'm going to have an owner who's going to have 2 sounders, 2 chart plotters, a radar, an AIS, an autopilot, a VHF, cameras. And so as you're adding things, don't think that your little distribution block that used to run a simple instrument is able to run everything else, right? So it's not unusual for the distribution for your electronics to be overtaxed as time progresses because we're putting more and more things. So consider that. And so power consumption becomes a factor. Either you bring more power to the distribution point or you simply limit yourself to not have too much power draw because maybe it's impossible. Some boats, it's really a huge pain to pull another line so you can distribute more power. And what I try to emphasize there is, and I'll make a list and we'll see them of all the different players out in the industry, but every manufacturer is playing to its strengths, right? There's really about 6 players to choose from, and they're all in the market, but they're not all doing the same thing. I mean, they might all call themselves MFD, chart plotters, but they all have a niche within that market, and they're really playing to their strengths. No single product can be everything for everyone. Otherwise, there'd just be one player. So, I want to make sure they're all there. So, you really have 6 players to choose from. Realistically, these are the big players. There's other ones, but these are the big ones. Garmin, Simrad, B&G, and Lowrance are part of the same company, Navico. You also have Raymarine and Furuno. So in a nutshell, and this is my opinion, so caveat, it's my opinion, it's not the truth. Garmin is something that I recommend for a lot of boat owners that want simplicity. People that just simply want it to work and don't want to read a manual and are not really technologically savvy and they don't really enjoy reading manuals and they don't like playing with stuff and they just want it to work, go Garmin. A few years ago, we did a really big boat. It was a 75-foot. It belonged to Shaw. And the captain had Furuno, and the owner had Garmin, because the owner didn't want to spend so much time understanding Furuno. But the captain swore by Furuno. And so Furuno would be at the other end of the spectrum. Furuno is commercial grade. It's phenomenal. Nobody can complain about Furuno's quality, but it might not be super intuitive to many of us. But if you're a captain of a boat and you use that boat all the time and it's your job to use that boat, and that's what you do for a living, if it takes you 3 months to figure out the Furuno system, it takes you 3 months, and then you use it every day or often, and then you won't forget. But if you do something else for a living and you don't have a photographic memory, then Furuno, for some of us, can be challenging because the manuals are extremely intimidating. And having worked in Japan as an engineer, I can tell you that usability is not the #1 thing that the Japanese are thinking about when they're designing their products. They're just not thinking about that. For them, reliability is everything, and usability is something that you'll just need to figure out. The other ones to compare, so Garmin is at one side, Furuno is at the other in terms of ease of use. And the other ones that are in the middle are Simrad, B&G, and Raymarine. Lowrance as well. And they're kind of a balance in between those two extremes. Simrad and Lowrance and B&G pretty much offer the same product. And what they do is they tailor to 3 different markets. B&G is Simrad tailored to sailors. Simrad is for yachties. Lowrance is for fishermen. That's the difference, right? So they've actually tailored the software. The hardware is very similar in the back. The screens are similar, everything's, but the user experience, right? So if you're, like I often have owners that are sailboaters, I would not recommend a Simrad system over a B&G system if you're a sailboater. The software in a B&G system is that this, first of all, the screens are all pretty much the same price points, right? So there's no financial incentive to go between B&G, Simrad, and Lowrance, one versus the other. And so if you're a sailor, I'd choose B&G. If you choose Navico, go B&G. If you've got a motor yacht, motorboat, go Simrad. If you're big into fishing, go Lowrance. So that's how you would choose the Navico product sets. B&G is surprising because people have, it used to be the Rolls-Royce or the Bentley of electronic systems. People that had indecent amount of money would have B&G on their boat. And it's like people that play polo. They're not so much concerned about costs. So that connotation of amazing price points don't really apply anymore. When they got bought out about 5-7 years ago, their price points came down, and what they did is they just simply made a piece of electronic equipment tailored for sailors. So it's quite nice, and you're not gonna have a heart attack when you buy the equipment. So the other point here is things that you're gonna look for when you're looking at a MFD, a multifunctional display. We talked a little bit about that, the difference between a Chartplotter and MFD. Chartplotter does only charting, and that's really rare, and only small screens only do Chartplotters now. Or a multifunctional display means it does something and something else, right? So it might be Chartplotter sounder, Chartplotter sounder radar, Chartplotter sounder radar AIS, right? So all of those Chartplotter, sounder, radar, AIS, autopilot control. Right? And then the list goes on because it's multifunctional. It's a computer. It's not a display anymore. It's not paired one-to-one to the sensor. It can have any sort of input, and it can display any sort, like your computer at home. It might do Word, Excel, play music, go on the internet, Photoshop, whatever you want to do with a computer. Those pieces of equipment are the same thing. They're computers, so they can do anything. Another choice that you're going to have to choose is, do you want the familiarity of a raster chart, which is basically an image of a paper chart? Literally, it's a photograph of a raster chart, of a paper chart, so that's raster. A vector chart is something that is, in some ways, more cartoonish because it actually got digitized, right? So all that chart information got digitized, and you can start adding layers, removing layers. You can have the contour lines be 66, 33, 11. I want land to be blue and the ocean to be orange. Anything you want to do, you can do. You can declutter the screen, unclutter the screen. You can have more data, no data. You can have, by the way, I'm really big into fishing, so I want to see all the chart contours. I don't care about fishing, and just show me, I've got a draft of 10 feet, 6 feet, just show me things that are dangerous to a sailboater. All those things are possible with a vector chart, right? But you've got to realize that when you take layers away, that's your choice. And the layers are not going to come back because the computer thinks you should see them. You decided that you were going to forego seeing information. Raster chart doesn't have that option. Like a paper chart, you see what you see, and you can't remove information from it. You can either zoom in or zoom out, and that's it. The other big one is nowadays is with Chartplotters and MFDs is the owners or the manufacturers are constantly updating the software. And I strongly suggest to all boat owners that have modern, so anywhere between 10 years and younger, to constantly update the software they're not just fixing bugs, they're bringing new feature sets. They're continuously improving the experience of the product by making it better. Not just fixing bugs, but actually adding new features to the device you already have. So you bought the hardware, but they'll be updating the software continuously. So it's getting easier and easier to do software updates because new ones have Wi-Fi and you can connect your phone to it and they just go get the updates. Older ones you have to transfer data from a card, download to your computer, bring the card to the boat, right? But nowadays it is getting easier. And I talked about buttons, choosing do you want buttons, do you want screens. Some of them actually now do both, which is nice. So they'll have full control via buttons on the side, full control via the screen. Like my laptop is a perfect example. My laptop, you can do everything on the screen, right? Or you can do everything from the keyboard. So it's dual, it's hybrid. Raymarine was the first one to come up with that. And then lastly is some of us maybe don't, maybe the sound system is too far away and you can start controlling your sound system from your helm, right? So for example, a sailboater, that would be a perfect example. The stereo's down below and you want to be adjust the volume or change songs and you want to do that from your MFD. So you can do that as well, as opposed to bringing a secondary remote up into the cockpit somewhere.
Screen size?
Yeah, on screen size, yeah, that's a good point. Go big. And I know you're thinking, well, that's just more money, Jeff. So obviously that's why you're telling us to spend more money. You're biased. But I can tell you that over time, your eyesight will not get better. That's a fact. And I've never met an owner that told me ever, oh, gee, I so wish I went smaller on my screen. God, in hindsight, that extra $300 was such a waste. As I amortize that screen over the next 15 years, if only I would have saved myself $20 a year, I'd be so much happier right now. It's never happened. Everyone regrets not having a bigger screen if it fit and it didn't look ridiculous. So I'm not suggesting that you have a 35-foot sailboat and you put a 16-inch diagonal chart plotter behind the wheel. No. But I'm saying if you have a choice between a 7 and a 9, and the 9 will fit, consider it. Because again, remember what I said earlier, I said the life expectancy of your electronic system is going to be between 10 and 20 years. Now, if you're very cash flow loose and money doesn't bother you, maybe you'll change every 5 years, but if you're going to do that, you're going to go big anyways. So I actually think it's a conservative financial decision to not want to have 2-foot-itis with your electronics and buy what you need and maybe a little bit more so that in 10 years you're not like, oh yeah, it'd be really nice to have a bigger screen because then I could do side by side. Because remember, those screens are multifunctional displays, so you can have Chartplotter on one and then sounder on the other, or you can have Chartplotter, radar, sounder, or you can mix and match any of those combinations. So the bigger the screen allows you to have more real estate to show all this information that you can put on the screen. So the first product that I want to look at is the Simrad EVO 3. They've actually, and I'm just showing you a screenshot, we're going to go, but they've redesigned the whole hardware and also the user interface. And you'll notice that the screen has a little bit of buttons on the side. And so this would be a hybrid, meaning you can do everything on the screen or everything via buttons without having to buy an external keypad. And so we did a big boat last year, about a 115-footer. And they were leaving. The boat was bought in Vancouver, and then they were leaving to San Diego. And that was something really important to the owner, well, the captain, is that they were able to be, when they're going to be in the high seas, that they can actually start operating the radar without having a touchscreen. But the owner really liked touchscreens because he doesn't want to figure out buttons. He just wants to push where he wants to go, and it's intuitive. So this was a good way for the captain to have something that he wants, and for the owner to have something they want. So the big thing about that screen, which is really interesting, which is new, is that it actually works when it's actually wet. So that was one of the big drawbacks with older touchscreens, is that as your hands, especially if you're in a flybridge, your hands shouldn't be wet. But if you're in a sailboat or you're even some flybridge and it's raining sideways, which sometimes unfortunately happens, the screen would not be able to operate because the screen would read all that moisture and it wouldn't really understand the resistance. Like you'd be touching and there'd be multiple points being touched at the same time. So the Solar Max screens that got introduced just in November allow the screen to be operated. They all have internal GPS, which is nice. So if you're on a flybridge or an application, you don't have to route another external GPS somewhere else. Now, you have the option of putting an external GPS. On that big boat, for example, it didn't really matter that it had an internal one. We also wanted an external one because the screen was so buried deep in a flybridge that there was so much stuff on top that the GPS was giving an okay reading, but they wanted a perfect reading. So you have the option of putting an external GPS. The other big thing, too, is that in the old days, you always needed an autopilot screen, but now what they're doing is they're putting autopilot control, not software, but hard buttons on the side. So in the past, it was easy for owners or manufacturers to say, well, I'll make a soft screen for the autopilot control. And I really didn't like that because you had to find it to disengage your autopilot. And sometimes your autopilot needs to be disengaged right now. Not in 5 seconds, not in 20 seconds. And if you're really, really stressed and you're about to hit something, you're not going to think straight unless you do it over and over and over and over again. So it's really nice to have a hard button that you can just disable the autopilot and grab the helm. And so these screens allow us to have hard buttons to disengage an autopilot without actually having to look for it in the menu. I mentioned the full operation via touchscreen or the keypad. Interesting, you can actually have multiple sounders connected to the device directly. So you can have 2 different sounders. There's 2 sounder ports. It's common. And I find that my wife and I, when we go boating, we're always saying, hey, I'd like to go somewhere. How do I get there? How much fuel is it going to take? How long is it going to take? And now I do it a lot with navionics because my electronics are a little bit older, and making a route on my circa 10-year-old navigation system is not that convenient. So with this here is they're doing auto routing relatively quickly, and so you can start doing trip planning. Where am I going to go tomorrow? Are we going to go from Prado Haven to Refuge Cove? Are we going to go to Roscoe? Where are we going to go? Are we going to go to Cortez? Where do we feel like going? And so then you can easily start kind of forecasting where you're going to go, and then you can make a selection without actually having to do your own route, because that's time consuming. And the big thing nowadays, which is really nice, is they actually have Wi-Fi built in, and that means that they can actually connect to a smartphone, right? So if you enable a hotspot on your smartphone, it will use your smartphone as a gateway to go to the internet, and it can actually automatically get software updates without you having to have the hassle of downloading chart data, finding a printer or a port on your computer that does it, taking it, uploading it. And even more, what they're doing now is they're also having updates on weather. So if you're in a place where you have cell connectivity, there are services now where you can actually download weather data via your phone to your Chartplotter, and they're going to show you grid files, right, without having a satellite radio connection like XM did for a while. So for sailors and power boaters that don't like to be tossed around too much, this might be interesting because now you can see the wind vectors, and you can actually start projecting what's going to happen over the next 2 hours, 6 hours, and they'll show you what the wind vectors are going to do and the wave heights are going to do in simulation mode right on your Chartplotter, which is a little bit more advanced than hearing a weather report from channel on a VHF, where you have to envision what they're saying, what the winds are going to do. A grid file is going to show you what's going to happen literally everywhere in the Strait of Georgia, or anywhere for that matter. Juan de Fuca, it doesn't matter. They're going to show you wave height, wind vectors, and all of that is going to be overlaid and animated on top of your Chartplotter. The Zeus 3 is very similar to the EVO 3, except the big thing, and you can see the screen sizes, there's huge range. The big thing about the Zeus and that I want to highlight, and by the way, this presentation is going to be available on our website in a PDF format, so if people want to see it later, it's completely accessible. We're going to post it probably on Saturday or Sunday. The big thing is sail steer, meaning what they've done B&G and their raison d'être is really making software that is tailored for sailors. And so just knowing how you're going to tack, what are you going to get, and all these things are built in the software, and it's kind of convenient. So they have that. They have also the built-in Wi-Fi, the Go-Free Wi-Fi. What that does is it enables you to have a chart plotter at your helm and then replicate that, let's say on a tablet, and then you could be literally inside the cabin of your boat at night, and you could turn on the radar, look at boats around you in the middle of the night, and see, oh, look, still there. Yeah, all the boats, it's blowing 25. Who's drifting, right? Because it doesn't matter how good your anchor is. It's everyone has to hold, right? And instead of going out in the cockpit in the middle of the night, you can look on your iPad. You're like, yeah, see all the targets. Everything's good, right? You can acquire targets if there's a few boats ahead of you. And with different radars now, they'll tell you if there's a collision course, i.e. if they're moving towards you over time, they'll actually, and we'll talk about those radars, they'll let you know. So you can actually have target in the middle of the night, you leave the radar on, you acquire targets that are ahead of you, and if it's blowing hard, you'll be notified via sounds that someone's coming onto you, there's a collision, which is really important, especially in those big crowded anchorages like Montague, Susha. You know, you see people boat and they drop like 40 feet of water, they drop 45, right? You know it's not going to be good, right? So this would be a good way for you to just kind of feel a little bit more safe without actually always having to go back to the helm. And remember, that means that you don't have to buy a second chart plotter, right? Because 10 years ago, boats that were commissioned in 05, 07, 08 had multiple chart plotters on sailboats, one at the helm, one at the chart table, because it was the only way of having the information in the chart table was simply having 2 chart plotters. But nowadays, you can simply buy an iPad. Most of us have one, and if you don't have one, it's a good excuse to buy one. And then suddenly the software is free, it doesn't cost you anything. And you can control, see everything, like if you were at the helm, without being at the helm.
Question for you.
Yeah?
Does your plotter have to, or your MFD have to be powered up?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it's taking all that information from the chart plotter itself. Yeah, so the chart plotter, it's a good question. The chart plotter itself, the MFD, has to be on. The software, the control doesn't happen in a black box somewhere else. All that intelligence resides in the computer, and the computer is the display. So, you know, there's a lot of different words to describe Fishfinders, sounders, sonars. Multiple purpose for that. Up to a few years ago, only very few people would use a sounder for collision avoidance. Sounds crazy, but we did it. The company was called Interface. They got bought out by Garmin. And Garmin last year introduced, and we'll talk about one of their products that do that. Do you have a sounder that's built into the display or black box, right? So depending, if you're really, really serious about fish finding, it's always better to buy a black box. Now, naturally, it's more money, but more money means better. So if you're really into it, a black box is better than having a built-in sounder. Now, for many of us, you know, we're maybe kind of amateurs for Fishfinder. It doesn't really matter. It's nice, but we don't want to spend a lot of money for it. So then having a built-in sounder into an MFD, which is super popular nowadays, will suffice. Different types of transducers. Also, different ways of mounting a transducer. You know, you can actually have it in hull, through hull. In hull is when you actually don't want to have a hole in your boat, but you're going to sacrifice a hell of a lot of performance for that. You want a through hull is the best, or you're going to put it at the stern, a transom, right? And the transom is convenient on a smaller boat, but if you've got a bigger boat and you have a swim grid, how are you going to kick it back, right? And there is stuff floating in the water, and sometimes it will kick up. It's meant to, right? Otherwise it would tear. And so the best transducer is a through hull transducer, but that means you're putting a hole in your boat. So that's a choice, right? And then remember, that's the one thing, even though Airmar makes all these transducers for the most part, well, not anymore, because actually now it's getting a really competitive field, but they used to. You can't have a Raymarine transducer go on a Garmin, or a Furuno one go on a Simrad, or a B&G. The connectors are still proprietary. And that's one of the frustrating things about sounders, or especially transducers, is that it's kind of pretty sticky, meaning if you had a Raymarine system and you want to go to Garmin, it's not going to be obvious. It's one of the problems is you might have to change that transducer out. Now, the good news is transducers from 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I mean, there's nothing been as big as GPS was when it probably came out 15, 20 years ago, is what's happening on the transducers front. Transducers are night and day. It's imagining an analog not even a dial tone phone versus a smart iPhone 7. Like transducers nowadays, it's almost unfair for fishermen. I've had owners that we put in the side view, down view, chirp, and it's just unbelievable what you can see beneath your boat. It's practically like radar, right? But beneath your boat, but not just under your boat, everywhere around your boat. And so there's a lot of reasons. I have owners now that are changing electronics, even though they don't need to get the new transducers. Here's an image of a forward-looking sonar. This is the Panoptix from Garmin. And actually, this is actually showing you not what is under the boat, which is what this might look like to a lot of us. We're thinking, oh, as the boat's moving, the trailing edge is over here, and that's where the boat is. No, the boat is not here. The boat is actually right here in the corner. It's telling you in 130 feet, you're going to hit a wall. So, depending on how technical you are, right, with the sort of boating you do, and if you like to push the envelope in terms of going in places that are not super safe, this would be something that as you go on the outside of Vancouver Island or Brownlands, and depending on the anchorages you like to go, this is something that might be nice. Because now you're not only seeing what's underneath your boat, you're seeing something forward of your boat. Now, you have to imagine, it's not telling you everything in front of your boat 5 miles each way. It's a narrow beam. So if you're constantly going like this, the boat's got to be in a steady direction, right? But it's at least something. It's a forward-looking sonar. And it displays a bottom up. You don't really need to, you worry about things in front. So it will display up to 300 feet, and the cruising speed that they recommend is no more than 8. So if you're going at 26 knots and you see 300 feet ahead of you, by the time you see what's ahead of you, it's under you. So you need to slow down to be able to react, right? So the top end cruising speed is around 8 knots to be able to react. It's like a car. You can't stop on a dime, right? By the time you see someone, if you're going 50 kilometers an hour, there's going to be a period of distance that you're going to travel regardless of when you saw them, because the brakes are not going to stop the car instantly. Same thing with a boat. So the advice is about 8 knots for cruising speed when you're worried about something in front of you. This is another image. It works with all Garmin chart plotters, like the GPS map and the Echo maps. Not all of them, but pretty much everything that's of significant financial cost. And this is the look of the transducer. This is actually completely nuts. So this is really almost an imagination. It's about augmented reality. I'm not sure anyone is familiar with augmented reality means. It's going to happen. It's almost like a virtual reality, but you see your world the way it is, but things within your sight are added as a layer. So it's not fake. It's your world, your view, but with information layered on top of it. So it's an app that uses your phone, and when your phone's in camera mode and you're looking through your phone, it's actually going to be showing your waypoints on the view that you're looking. So you can scan the horizon, and it's going to, oh, your waypoints are here, here. They're going to geolocate your waypoints on the reality of the world that you see through your phone. Like, awesome. So it only works right now with the Dragonfly Pro and the Wi-Fish Chirp. But here you are, and actually the Raymarine Dragonfly is not that expensive. It's actually a very cost-effective sounder and chart plotter. And so you can then stream that information to your tablet, and then you can go, okay, where's everything? And instead of looking at things on a chart plotter and then you're imagining where that is on top of your world, the world you see. You take your screen and it's going to show you where your waypoints everywhere are. So it's pretty amazing. And it's not expensive at all. It's just an app. So it's just something you enable. And they're talking about that too for glasses, right? They're having these glasses that you're going to have. Snowboarders have them now, skiers, or even bikers, where they augment your reality and they're showing you things on top of the world as you see it. And so this is a way to do it with the smartphone that you already have, or the tablet. So this is another view. So they're actually showing the owner where the waypoints are and the buoys are. And so if he looks forward, he's like, oh yeah, that's where it is. Go right there. And they'll show you waypoint distance, heading. How do you get to that waypoint just from your smartphone? The next thing I want to talk about is solid state radars. Now this is not something that's completely new, but these are two new products from two different players. A while back, we had those from Broadband, from the Navico family. But nowadays, multiple manufacturers have them. Raymarine has it. Garmin came out with theirs, and also Furuno did the same. What's really interesting about these radars is they're trying to bring the radar to a more usable benefit without being an expert at operating a radar. And so what they're doing is they're processing all this information and trying to discern or help you discern what are things you should worry about and things you shouldn't. So one thing, for example, that Garmin is doing, and they're not the only one, they're saying, you know, we're going to track all the targets for you on a radar screen. Things that don't move are probably things you don't really need to worry about as much, unless you go hit them. But things that are moving are more complicated, because you're moving, they're moving, and maybe you're going to move to a place that you're going to collide at some given point. And so what they'll do is they're actually going to highlight over time, and they're going to leave a paper trail so you can see that target over time where it used to be. So you can even imagine where it used to be as opposed to remember. And then as it gets more and more dangerous, because you're on a collision course, you could do this, by the way, with MARPA before, but you'd have to acquire targets. This is doing it automatically. At one point, it's going to say, well, whoa, this is starting to be a little tricky. It's in red. And it's actually going to show you the vector of that object that's moving on the radar screen. And so people that are out on the ocean do this all the time, and you know, they're mariners. They run their boats by radar. And they do this all the time, and they're looking at the screen, and that's all they're looking. They don't even need to look out. They're looking at the screen, and someone's on the bridge just running the boat by radar, and that's all they're doing. But for some of us that don't have that skill set, this is a really easy way to start processing the information that's on the screen and giving you the relevant piece of information that you should consider more than other pieces of information on the screen. The other thing they do is they start increasing target sizes of things that they worry about that are moving, right? So this little blob is tiny, but a collision is a collision. So they're going to make it a little bit bigger, and they're going to emphasize it. By the way, you should maybe worry about that because it's moving, and it's moving not away from you, it's moving towards where you're going. The other thing too that you can do is power consumption. You can reduce the speed of rotation of the radar, so it doesn't for power. For sailboaters, that's a good thing. They might only do 24 resolutions versus 48. They're instant on. They don't take any warm-up time. Super low power draw. 40 watts is peak output or peak demand. You can buy them in different sizes, 18 and 24. And the interesting thing about them is their range is super short, 20 feet. So for anchoring, it's starting to be pretty interesting. You know, like when you're anchoring and you're trying to figure out your scope, assuming you put out more than 5 feet than the depth, you've got to know where are all these other boats, and I'm going to go somewhere, and I'm going to drop my anchor, and I'm going to pull back, and what's going to be my swing, and how much chain can I put out? Or you want a stern tie, how much distance am I going to be before I drop? If you've got a radar that's accurate to 20 feet, that certainly helps estimating distances to shore, distances to other boats. Certainly more accurate than my own skill at figuring out the distance between 200 yards or 210 yards. So this is really useful day to day, and then you'll probably end up using your radar a lot more if you've got that level of accuracy for near shore or inshore type of applications. This is what the radar looks like, and you see all those trails? So they're showing you where the object was over time. The next one that's doing this is the Furuno radar. They only make it in 24, not 18. Also solid state. They call it target analyzer. They all have different names for it. It's marketing. They're doing the same thing. But the big thing is they're processing this information to make it easier for you. So that's the big, for owners that already have a Furuno system, this might be a radome that you can put on top of, and it will work with a TZ Touch. And this is what it looks like. So you see how they're highlighting things in red? Things in red, they're like, it's not moving, not too much to worry about. But if you're a boat owner and you don't have overlay, you might worry about all of these things, right? What's moving, what's an island, what's a reef, what's not? And your brain's like literally trying to figure out, has it moved? Oh yeah, it's moving, it must be something. This will do it automatically. It's tracking everything on the screen, and the things that they think it's moving, they're gonna put in different colors, especially if you're going in that direction and both of you potentially are gonna hit at some point later on. All right, so we're gonna talk just quickly about AIS. AIS is something that was invented about probably 15 years ago. There's probably no reason for someone not to have an AIS receiver on their boat. They're relatively inexpensive and allows you to see all boats that transmit their location VAS, and AIS is over kind of close near to VHF frequencies. It's a subset of it, but basically it's over the air, so you don't need another station. It's boat to boat. You don't need a repeater station. AIS would work in the middle of the Pacific somewhere. Boats are talking to each other via VHF, boat to boat. AIS does the same thing. And so when you buy AIS, you have a choice of seeing all others or also transmitting and seeing, right? So are you going to be ships that have to are Class A transponder and receive. As a boat owner, recreational, you're going to be a Class B. And you can be a Class B receive only or a Class B receive and transmit. I strongly encourage everyone to have the receive. The transmit is another matter. It's obviously more cost. And this is basically a radio from ICOM. This is the latest radio that they just came out. This radio has an AIS receiver built in. And what's interesting about this radio is also, as you could see, is that it had a large color display. It has a built-in GPS, which is nice because most radios have the ability to have an external GPS connected to it. But that's never done because it's a hassle. And so the DSC function on the radio is of really no benefit to most people. Maybe 10% of us have it connected, but 90% of us don't. And so this has a built-in GPS so that when you press the DSC, they'll know where you are, which is a really important feature because if they don't know where you are, it's going to take them a while to try to triangulate your position. The other thing that's nice is it actually, instead of doing you can actually do a command mic with this radio, i.e. a second receiver. You can also buy that radio. It looks identical, but there's no VHF antenna terminated to it. It's actually a networked radio to another one. So if you have a boat that has two equally important bridges, maybe a pilot house and a fly bridge, you'll have both radios with only one VHF antenna. They look the same, you can do everything the same, but there's only one VHF antenna connected to the master, and the other one feels exactly like the one down below, and you only need one antenna. Because depending on your boat, boats that have two VHF, sometimes it's a hassle because you need to have two VHF antennas. And some owners don't like a command mic because it doesn't give them all the features that they like from the lower one. So this is a way for you to have two radios, one single VHF antenna. The next thing I think is really interesting is what are called AIS man overboard beacons. So for some of us that do boat either alone or with a short crew, these devices are either mounted on a life jacket or on your person. And if you fall overboard, they're going to be transmitting via AIS your location not only to the boat that you fell off of, but to everyone in the vicinity that has an AIS receiver. The Coast Guard will see that. And not only does it tell you where you fell in the water, but it tracks you for 7 days in the water because you're going to drift in that water. And so they will know, and all the chart plotters around are actually going to get a warning that there's a mayday that happened and that an individual fell in the water, and it's going to show you on your chart plotter where that person is over time. And with the waters where we cruise and the type of temperature the water is, this is really useful because this is a way for, if you lose someone and you're doing on a sailboat 6, 7, 8 knots, by the time you turn around, and especially if you're sailing, and you go and try to find that person, that's extremely challenging. At the best of times with a lot of crew. If you're 2 people to keep that eye contact as you're changing the sails and you're going back to rescue that person, it's going to be really hard. This would be a really good way for you to have always, not voice communication, but your location to be seen on that chart plotter on that boat. And these beacons cost about $400 Canadian. So if you're shorthand crew or single hand crew, if you fall overboard and you want to be found, this would be a good way to do it. And you can actually see how small it is. It's not that big. There's no new autopilots that came out in November, but what I want to include here is, and I'm going to show a screenshot, is when you're going to be looking for an autopilot, right now the big thing with autopilot, and this is for example a Simrad one, they're all coming with gyros. And gyros are really essential to understand sea state in a 3-dimensional motion. Not only where your boat is at any given time like this, as it's going in confused seas, but the rate at which it's going like this for redraw, because now your radar screen wants to be matched perfectly to your chart plotter. And if you don't have a smart autopilot or a FluxGate autopilot, the 2 of them are going to be doing this all the time, unless it's perfectly calm and you're going in flat, dead water. But when things are not really great out there, the great thing with a new autopilot is the 2 are going to be married perfectly, because the autopilot will know that you're actually going in a 3-dimensional path, as opposed to a FluxGate that only understands 2-dimensional, right? And it's just juxtaposing a 2-dimensional motion on a 3-dimensional reality. And that means that the radar and the chart plotter are always like this. And then if you're trying to figure out what are real targets and not targets, you've got to remember that the chart plotter is always going like this. And it's easy if you were in California and it's just a straight coastline. But over here, when there's a lot of islets, islands, and reefs, to have that in your mind and to overlay the 2 is a lot harder. One of the really popular things that we've done on boats, and I've done on my own boat, is this SuperHALO. I wrote an article, I think in November in Pacific Yachting in my monthly column. This is my 3rd cell booster, because I'm always searching to be able to work remotely. And this is pretty amazing. It won actually Best in Show this year in Vancouver in terms of the best electronics. Highly recommend considering it if you want to have data connectivity on your boat. And what I try to highlight there is that actually the product, when you buy that product, it actually comes with everything you need to install it. Unlike a typical cell booster, only is a cell booster. This has the external antenna, the internal antenna, all the cabling, the mounts. Everything you need is in the box. And to give you an idea, I installed mine just during Thanksgiving weekend, and there was a debate that weekend, and I was in Jedediah watching the debate, over-the-air Shaw, over cellular, on a TV, streaming Shaw with this on Jedediah, which, by the way, does not have good coverage. It's in the middle of nowhere. So pretty amazing. Cost, I think, is around $2,000 or $2,500, something like that. Cameras. This is a really neat little camera. It's an engine room camera that's a thermal imaging camera. And I'm going to just show a little screenshot here. You can actually show, it shows you the engine room, and it will start monitoring different areas in the engine room and tell you when that area is getting too hot, visually. So you can, and it'll send audible alarms and visual alarms that that area, your manifold, is hotter than it normally is. And it's going to track that place, because the camera's not moving, over time. And so you can start seeing your engine room the way you should, and not with our own eyes, but with thermal imaging camera. A little bit like Predator from the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie from the 1980s. So you see the world in Predator mode. And in your engine room, that's how you should see it, because it's everything about heat. So that's a camera, and that's around $1,500. The next thing is, and I've got a lot of owners that do that, which is they're putting little cameras in their boat. And if the marina has Wi-Fi, it allows you to actually be able to go on your boat, see what's happening on your boat, and actually talk to someone on your boat. And I had one of my technicians was on a Grand Banks 47 in Cole Harbor. And the owner scared the living bejesus out of our technician, because Scott was looking for the keys. And so Brian's like, Scott, and this owner was in Chile at the time. Scott, the keys, I didn't leave them under the drawer. They're actually under the chart table. And Scott's like, what the hell is going on? And it was Brian coming, because Brian loves his boat. And so they were talking over Wi-Fi, and the owner was literally in Chile working on a mining project over there. So that's kind of neat. And so if you don't have the option of being on your boat all the time and you want to see how your boat is doing, and these are readily available products. And the last product that I want to highlight is this Fusion little stereo. What's great about it is it actually floats, so you can actually have it in the water. You can stream all sorts of different content, Bluetooth. You can have if you don't have a smartphone, you can actually have a USB key in there. You can have radio in there. If you've got an app on your phone or on your smartwatch, you can actually control it remotely. You can have it on your paddleboard, on your dinghy, your tender, right? Maybe on the deck. And it's Fusion quality, meaning it's really well done and the sound's pretty great, and it's 240-watt speakers. And basically that ends my presentation. So any questions? And just by the way, also I want to highlight that there's forms at the back if you have any sort of feedback on the presentation itself. And I encourage you to do that. We always like to hear what you have to think. And I'm probably going to be kicked out, but if you have questions, I'm also willing to be in the back of the room there on the outside. Thank you, everyone.